Hi everybody, and welcome to this webinar. Appreciate you joining. I didn't want to wait too much longer. I realise people's time's valuable. So we're going to be looking at the concept of the employer of choice today, and in particular how we might benchmark that, because it's one thing to say that you're an employer of choice. It's quite another thing to be able to measure that. And of course, a lot of companies these days are saying, or not just companies, public sector organisations as well, are claiming to be employers of choice. But when you scratch the surface, it's really just considered to be a marketing tool. So we really want to look at what it means to be an employer of choice today. So let's consider what we'll be covering during the session, and at any time during the session, as per normal, you are more than welcome to write in a comment or ask a question over in the question box there on the right hand side, and I'll keep an eye on that throughout the presentation, and when I can see that there's somebody that's got something to say, I will just simply address that as we go through the presentation. That way, of course, it keeps it as interactive as we possibly can, and also gives you the chance not to forget your question at the end, because there might be something that I say that you might want clarification on or whatever. So we're covering a lot of content in this short session, so fasten your seatbelts. Okay, essentially there are three things that I want to cover during this session. I've obviously talked about the 8 values, and I'd like to share with you some of my research about what those 8 values are of an employer of choice. And while I go through those, you might like to consider where your organisation is aligned with those 8 values, because those 8 values are fundamental. We're going to look at some of the strategies for actually creating a better workplace in terms of being able to give greater expression to those values, and some of the myths that are perhaps holding organisations back. So we'll look at that as well. And I guess all of you would be interested in how we might benchmark those. So I'll show you the tool that we use to benchmark that, and then we'll be done. So as I say, keep the questions coming as we go. All right. So let's cut straight to the chase. Here are the 8 values of what you're looking at on your screen at the moment. Is that on the left-hand side, you can see some of the old values of what I call the traditional employment relationship. And what you can see on the right-hand side are the new values. These are the 8 values that underpin an employer of choice. Now, when I talk about values, and we use the term very loosely, don't we? What I'm really talking about is the relationship between employee and owner. So I have a strong view that the health of a relationship is very much dependent on the relationship between the owner or their agents, which of course are managers, and the employees. So where there's a healthy relationship, or perhaps I might say a progressive relationship, you're likely to see the values on the right-hand side. And under a traditional organisation, you're likely to see the old values on the left-hand side. So let me just run through those values with you very briefly before we move on, because it's important to understand what I mean by each of those labels. So specialised employment was really a concept that suggested that if you want to insulate yourself from the competition, both as an employee and an organisation, the whole idea was to specialise. So if you specialise in an area, you would create a market for yourself and ultimately be able to protect that market. Now, what we're finding now is the world is changing so fast that specialisation is not what it used to be. So what we're actually after now is a different value. In fact, you'll notice that the values on the right-hand side are actually diametrically opposite the values on the other side. So flexible deployment means to be able to use your skill set in a variety of different ways. So for example, I might be a consultant, I am a consultant, and I might write books, I may deliver webinars, I may give public presentations, I might do executive coaching, and it goes on. So I've flexibly deployed my skill set across a range of medium. And for the organisation that is effective in, becoming an employer of choice, that's precisely what they do. The next area is internal focus versus customer focus. So it used to be thought that if we can dot our I's and cross T's internally, if we can get all of that sorted, in other words, if we have a good quality assurance system, we're likely to please the customer because we're producing services and goods that are pretty much consistent with what the customer wants. But as we all know, in the fickle age of the customer that we're living in, that's not enough anymore. We actually have to be customer focused. And I don't mean providing customer service, I mean that everything that's said, done and thought about in the business needs to have a clear picture of the customer in mind. So what we're doing on the left-hand side is we are retaining some of those values, and what we're doing on the right-hand side is we're actually adding to those values. But the predominant value is the one that's on, or the set that's on the right-hand side. So focus on the job. So people would be given a job description and some very clear key performance indicators. And so that would be the way of organising yourself in organisations. And as we all know, in a lot of cases, that's still the case. But the focus actually needs to be on performance, not the job. Just because you're doing your job doesn't mean you're performing. And just because you're performing doesn't necessarily mean you're doing your job. So they are actually two separate things. But the focus is on performance. And when we consider performance, we can consider performance in two dimensions. There's job performance or technical performance, and there's non-job performance. And the non-job performance is what I'll talk about a little bit later on in the presentation. Functional-based work means working in a bureaucracy where there's a hierarchy. Now gives way to project-based work, which basically means that everything that happens in an organisation is conceptualised as a project rather than a hierarchy of responsibility. And of course that creates a far better, more flexible workplace. The next one is human, spirit and work. Any job's a good job, and baby boomers would often think that, and they would do what they were told. And now what we're finding is that we need to inculcate human spirit and work, which basically means give people some meaning in work. And as we know, there's a whole engagement movement that's developed over the last 20 years, which is really around human spirit and work. Most of it's been done notoriously poorly, but nevertheless, it is about actually getting people to bring their hearts and minds to work with them. Loyalty gives way to commitment, and some of you may think, well, aren't they the same thing? Not necessarily. Loyalty was definitely a prized commodity in the last century. From an employee point of view, an employer was looking for loyal employees, but somebody that's loyal isn't necessarily productive. In other words, they're going to be a little bit resistant to change. They're going to be used to how things are done and so forth. We don't necessarily subscribe to the view that we're after loyal employees anymore. What we're actually after are committed employees. These are people who basically may well stay for only 2 years, which incidentally is the average time a person spends in the one workplace. In fact, it's a little less than 2 years, and it's obviously diminishing as it goes. We're actually looking for people who will commit to helping the organisation achieve its strategic direction, and in return the organisation will commit to helping that particular employee with their career. Training, what I mean by training is sort of sitting in a classroom, listening to an instructor. Of course, there's a place for that still, but I think the new value is learning and development, and that is there's a whole variety of ways and means that people actually learn. And what we need to do is to broaden our understanding of people development beyond the training agenda. Closed information is based on the concept that we only get told on a need-to-know basis. And of course we hear that quite a bit still. And or no news is good news, we hear these sayings in workplaces, and of course we're wondering why employees aren't showing any initiative. And that's because they don't have the quality of information and communication that they need in order to make those decisions and show initiative. So the modern organisation, the employer of choice, is really interested in open information. That is where the employee has the same line of sight as the manager. They can see all of the information that they need in order to do their job and more. So these are the 8 values on the right-hand side. And what's interesting about them, as you could probably work out, is they're diametrically opposite the ones that are on the left-hand side. And so it's a dramatic change for some organisations to become employers of choice. I find, and I'm sure you'd agree, there are lots of organisations that are in flux between the old and the new. So they're halfway between the old and the new, and in fact may even be somewhat confused. So this becomes a bit of a struggle because people recoil back. For example, they might religiously have job descriptions and use them for everything, but then on the other hand, they're very customer focused. So you can have a mix of values, if you like. But those are the 8 values that are critically important. And if you show me an organisation that lives and breathes those values on the right-hand side, I would suggest to you that by my definition at least, they are an employer of choice. All right, moving along. So what I'm basically talking about is a concept called the psychological contract. Hopefully that'll come up on your screen soon. Anyway, it's taking some time. Maybe that's because I've got a video there. Anyway, let me talk about them. Let me talk about the psychological contract, and hopefully that image will come up on your screen. The psychological contract, psychological and contract, 2 words. Psychological means it's between our ears, and contract means it's between 2 or more people. So essentially what a psychological contract is the notion of what an individual can offer the organisation on the one hand, and what the organisation on the other expects of their employee, and vice versa, what the individual expects of the organisation, and on the other hand, what the organisation can offer. Now, this contract is in between our ears, so a very simple example of this would be that employees have an expectation that they'll be paid, employees have an expectation they'll be treated with some dignity, and they have an expectation that they'll be paid on time. Organisations or managers, on the other hand, have an expectation that employees will do the job required of them, that they'll turn up on time, and so forth. So these expectations are between our ears. Apologies that that hasn't come up on your screen. Let's try the next one. Okay, I just, there it goes, it's up now. I've got a question here from Simone. Thank you, Simone. Is this being recorded? Yes, it is. It's being recorded, Simone, so rest assured. I just checked the record button. I did press it, so I'll actually be sending you out an email after this so that you'll have a recording and also the slides. So you'll have both of those. Okay, so this busy slide here, which I won't run through in its entirety, but I just wanted to paint a bigger picture for you about these 8 values so that you could actually see how they work. So what you've got on the left-hand side are the 8 values of the employer of choice. What you've got in the middle column are the expectations of employees. So these are things that employees expect. And over on the right-hand side, we've got expectations of the manager. Now, each of those expectations, whether they be employee or manager, all relate to that particular value. So you can actually see how it works in practice. So let me give you an example just to show you how it works. Let's take customer focus as a value. You'll notice that the employee expectation, that is what managers expect of employees, is to serve the customer before their manager. And what happens is when we're often in a situation where we're dealing with our clients or customers, we've kind of got 2 bosses. We've got the customer, of course, and we've got our manager. And often the customer and the manager have different expectations. And this is very confusing to a person who is actually trying to service the customer's needs. Do I go with what the customer wants, or do I default to what the manager wants? So an organisation that's an employer of choice will make it very clear to their team, not just by rhetoric but also by actions, that it is critically important that the customer is the #1 priority. Sounds easy in a webinar like this, but at the end of the day, that's the expectation. Now, from the manager's point of view, or should I say from the employee's point of view, they expect to be provided with information, skills and incentives to focus externally. And if they've been given that focus, then obviously they're in a much stronger position to be able to enact that value, which in this case is customer focus. So you can see that there are corresponding expectations from both managers and employees. So this is really the blueprint, if you like, for the employer of choice. It's the actual framework that we can use to go in and be able to assess our organisation. Now, we can assess that by simply looking at it and making observations, which you're probably doing right now, or we can do it in a little bit more scientific way, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But nevertheless, that's the framework that we use to determine whether or not we've become an employer of choice. Okay, moving right along. So what I want to do now is talk about some myths about performance management. And some of these myths have been around for 100 years or longer, and talk about some of the strategies for overcoming some of these myths. All right, so, and I'll take them in order. So I'll just wait for that to come up on your screen. There it is now. So what you'll notice down here is a little icon which tells you which value. So I'm actually going to run through the 8 values, and if you want to know which one we're up to, you just look down there and you'll see, in this case, the first one is going to be flexible deployment. And the first management myth that is this, that job specification improves performance. If we narrow people's jobs down to a specific set of tasks, then we improve performance. And certainly Frederick Taylor was the first one that came up with that concept 100 years ago on the Ford Motor Company assembly line. But, of course, that's the old value of specialised employment. But what specialisation does cause a lot is tunnel vision. So in other words, if I've got a very narrow job to do, very specified, it's likely that I'm not going to show any interest or any inclination to have any interest in anything else that happens beyond my patch. So you create this problem in organisations that people can't see past their nose because they're too busy doing what's required of them in front of them. So what's the remedy for that? Well, the remedy for that, there's a number of things you can do, but essentially to create flexible deployment is one of the ways of doing that is to do what I call, or design what I call a skills matrix. What a skills matrix is, and there's an example there, a very simple one in front of you. You've got over on the left-hand side, in this team, we've got 6 people, Joe through to Kathy. And across the top, we've got 9 competencies. So in this team, the argument is we've got nine tasks that need to be done, or 9 clusters of tasks. And we've got 6 people that are required to do those tasks. Now, we want to move that team to a flexible deployment. So what we have to do is train people up in each of those competencies so that they, in fact, are competent in all 9. And by doing that, we're creating an organisation that's flexible. And what you can see, the code there on the screen, is that if we look at this, you can see that there are white spaces. The white spaces suggest that that person hasn't had any coaching or training in that area. So if you look at Harry, for example, Harry has had no training whatsoever in competencies 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. The light grey, on the other hand, is showing that people are undergoing training. So they've started learning how to do something, but they're not yet able to be they're not able to go without close supervision. So that's the light grey, and you can see Harry's obviously got a start in competency 3, and then the dark grey is actually the competent. So this means that they can do that skill to our expected standard of performance without any particular supervision. And you can see there that Harry has that in number 4. All right, now the black is for those people in the team who not only are competent in a particular skill, but they have the necessary communication skills to be able to train other people in the team. And you can see there that Joe's across 3 competencies, 2, 3 and 4. And so I could call upon Joe to upskill Bill, Harry, Sue and Kathy at any time in competency 2. So it focuses the attention, and what I'd be hoping for, that by a designated period of time, that all 6 of those people are actually got dark grey blocks against their name for every single competency in that team. Now I've got a flexibly deployed team. So food for thought, you might like to think about that one as to how it might fit in with your organisation. All right, moving on to management myth number 2. And again, you can see down in the bottom left-hand corner, this is relating to customer focus. The management myth that is in the way is quality systems and processes guarantee good outcomes. Now, the whole McDonald's Corporation is built around this concept that if we provide good systems and processes, quality will be assured. Well, yes, to a certain extent, but it also means that we have a very narrow view of the customer, because if a customer is quite fickle, they're quite fussy about what they want, then this myth is not going to work, because the customer will want to be treated as an individual. So I'm not suggesting you throw out your quality assurance systems. Of course, they're important, but they're not the be-all and end-all. And what you've got to do is try and create an environment where the quality, the service quality is absolutely paramount. above and beyond the quality assurance that goes on in the organisation. Okay. Now, and of course, for customer focus, the key thing there is role clarity, training, empowering people. There's a whole bunch of things around that that are critically important. Now, myth number 3, which is of course the one for performance focus, is that the job description helps employees understand their organisational role. Now, why is that a myth? Because we all seem to have these things called a job description. I wrote a book called The End of the Job Description. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't have a work document. I just don't think we should be calling it a job description. I think we should be calling it a role description, but that's another matter. But basically, the job description does not help people understand their organisational role. It helps them understand the small cog that they have in a bigger picture, but it certainly doesn't in any way encourage them to find out how the rest of the organisation works. So it's actually an impediment. And if you doubt that, have a look on the right-hand side there. These are all the different processes that occur in a performance management framework in an organisation. We recruit people, we induct them, we train them, we remunerate them, we work out whether they fit into our succession plans, and we performance manage. Now, each of those are hugely reliant on the job description. We ask competency-based questions in the job description. We induct people around their job role. We train people in the technical component. We remunerate people on how well they've completed their job description. We actually promote managers from technical, technicians. We promote managers on the basis that they've got great technical skills. Again, the job description, it comes into play, and then of course we have a performance review, and the first place we look is on the job description. So let's get rid of the job description. Let me explain what I mean by that. Over here on the left-hand side, it's on your screen now, you'll notice that work performance is actually divided into 2 concepts. We have a job role, which essentially is based on some key result areas, and there are some competencies underpinning that, and we have a key performance indicator for each of those. That's great. On the right, and that's what's normally covered in the job description, just that. But there's a whole bunch of performance that goes into non-job roles as well, and these are things, and in fact I cited 4 of them. Non-job roles that are important to performance include things such as having a positive mental attitude and enthusiasm, being a team player, skill development, and innovation and continuous improvement. All of those things are critically important to an organisation's performance, but yet they're often left off the job description. If they're included, they're often done at the bottom as a set of bullet points. So it's critically important that we conceptualise work performance as a combination of job and non-job roles. So, if we don't do that, we create a myth around the job description being the be-all and end-all of organisational life. You'll notice that I've put up on the screen now, and you'll see them, these are the 4 non-job roles that I've identified. And I don't doubt for a minute there are many, many others, but certainly these are 4 that my research has indicated are critically important. So just imagine for a moment what your organisation would be like if you had people who all had a rotten attitude, they were all not team players, they didn't want to grow and develop, and they didn't offer any ideas and suggestions as to how the organisation could perform better and do their job more effectively. That would be a problem workplace. So you can see that they're critically important. Just to underline, yeah, so I'll leave it at that and move on to myth number 4. Now, myth number 4 is that a business is best organised around functions. So when I go into an organisation, the first thing that a manager will often put in front of me is a org chart. And normally the org chart has the CEO at the top. It has, 4 or 5 people reporting to the CEO. Then it has a number of people reporting to the senior managers, and it goes on down the line. So I'd like you to think carefully about this as to what's wrong with that organisational structure. There is a lot wrong with it. In fact, I don't think there's anything that's necessarily a perfect, way of organising in organisations, but the silo mentality that we have in organisations has to go, and the sooner the better. Here's another way that you might want to consider organisations, depending on what your industry is as well. That makes a difference. If you think, so we've got what we call the matrix model, and I don't know whether you work in a matrix model. We have the silos, which in this case are operations, finance, marketing, human resources, and going across each of those silos is some projects. In this case, they're product lines. And so what effectively happens in a matrix organisation is that the employee has 2 bosses. One of their bosses is their functional manager, and the other boss is their project manager. And this in itself can create problems and confusion where the employee doesn't quite know who to report to about what. So that has its drawbacks, but at least what it was trying to do was to break down the silo mentality that we get from the functional model. Now, and a very interesting model, and you see this in construction and some white goods, is what we call the product model. Now, the product model basically is a silo configuration, except this time the silos are based around products, so that we have a dedicated team in each of those silos that looks after that particular product line. So we split HR up across 4 silos. We have a head of each silo. We have a workforce that's self-contained within each of those. So again, the problem with this approach often is the fact that people have a silo mentality, it's just a different sort of mentality, and forget about working cross-functionally. So lead exchanges, generating new ideas, offering suggestions, all of those things don't normally happen cross-functionally with the product model, despite the best intentions of the manager. Now, I'd like you to consider this model, which is unique to myself. I put this together. I've been experimenting with a concept to try to create a customer-focused organisation, and one that's based on projects rather than functions, because remember, this value is project-based work. And what you can see there is that the customers are in the centre, and that makes good sense, doesn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, none of us would be in this broadcast if it wasn't for someone purchasing the services we provide or the goods that we build. So how about in most org charts, you don't even see the customer. They're not even conceptualized, and that's a problem. Then you have the next layer, and these are a series of concentric circles, where we have the frontline. Now, the frontline people are the people who deal directly with the customers, right? Then the next concentric circle says operations, which is essentially the support mechanisms that allow the front line to do their job effectively. So, for example, in an accounting practice, the front line would often be the accountants, and the operations would probably be, the support staff who might be on the desk and in other places. The next concentric circle is the projects. Now, the argument is, or my argument at least, is that everybody who's involved in the organisation should be involved in a project-based team. The project-based team looks at things such as workplace culture, reward and recognition, perhaps a social club. If we got everybody involved in projects, as sort of like their community service within the organisation, things will run much better. And then the strategic layer at the outset is the management team. So the managers obviously oversee all of this, and you'll see that the dotted lines in the middle signify that there are functions or boundaries around different organisational structures. So if it's perfectly valid to indicate them there, but we indicate them with a dotted line because we don't want them to completely dominate decision making and structure. So that's a little model that you might find interesting to toy with in your own workplaces. What you see over here on the right hand side is some of the different project teams, or at least ideas for project teams that an organisation can set up to work with. All right, moving right along. Myth number 5 is that a satisfied employee is a productive employee. I just wrote an article about this not so long ago. It's not true. And what we try and do is we try and satisfy people. And we think if we can satisfy people, we are doing our bit. So what do we do when we try and satisfy people? Well, we will pay them, we'll give them some bonuses, we'll give them all the rewards and support that they need, and then we expect that people are just going to operate at optimum level of productivity. Doesn't happen that way. So in order to create human spirit in work, what we're attempting to do is create stimulating work. And Daniel Pink talks about this and talks about knowledge workers. Knowledge workers don't respond very well to the carrot and the stick. They just don't. I know I don't. I'm sure most of you here would be a knowledge worker, and you probably don't either. But we do respond to 3 things. We like our sense of autonomy, so we might like to decide how to do things. We want to master what we're doing, so we want to actually master the skill set that we're doing, and we want to continue to grow and develop. And as Abraham Maslow talks about, self-actualization. And the third thing that we want to do is we want to understand the purpose of what we're doing, so that we feel that we're completing the why of work. Simon Sinek talks about this, the why of work. So my suggestion to you is, if you want to create the value of human spirit in work, then look at the work. That's the place to look. Not all the trinkets. Look at the work and start working with how you might make work more autonomous, giving people more chance to grow and develop, and helping to explain and communicate to them what benefits the customers are getting from the products and services that you may well produce. Now, another myth number 6, is that we hear it all the time: a loyal employee is an asset to the business. Well, I've talked about that briefly, and I'm not sure that that's the case. So what happens is we try and hold on or rationalise why we don't get rid of people on the basis of their perceived loyalty. Big mistake. So Maya put together a little framework that said there are 3 things that will keep somebody committed to the organisation. And they include a desire to stay. So why would someone want to stay? They want to stay because they believe in the cause, they believe in the mission, they believe in what you do. That's really, really important and often underestimated. If people understand the good work that you do and the value that you create, then they may well be motivated, not all, but many would be motivated to for a desire to stay. Another reason they may be motivated is that the cost of leaving is too high. They might lose their health benefits, they might lose their peer group, their friends. All of these things play into the mind of people who are contemplating leaving the workplace. And a feeling of obligation, meaning that the organisation is willing to do certain things for me, and in return, I'm willing to do certain things for the organisation because they're helping me out. So on 3 levels, if you've got those 3 levels happening, you're likely to create what I term as a value of commitment in your organisation. Okay, moving right along. Keep those questions coming, folks, because we may not have a lot of time at the end, and I'm very keen to hear your comment or the questions that you have. So just type them in the question box on the right-hand side. Now, myth number 7 we're up to. So myth number 7 is a technically superior workforce is a pathway to high-performing business. No, not necessarily the case. Do we want technically superior people? Obviously. But let's not delude ourselves into thinking that that's all that we need to do, because you'll find that the organisation will be unhappy as a result. And I find that 75, maybe 80% of the training and development that goes on in organisations are around helping people to improve their capacity to do a particular job. So we've got 3 interesting approaches to learning and development. We've got the job-centered approach, which believes that if people can improve their skill set on their job description, they will inevitably be more effective. There's another school of thought, and it's been around for about 25 years, that argues that if we help the person become a better person, it will reflect well on the organisation overall. And finally, product-oriented. So if you're product-centered, that's great. What it means is that we are trying to resolve problems collaboratively and obviously as quickly as possible. So what I find quite interesting is that very few people are actually got the skills to be product-centered, which is a bit of a worry. And, I can recall going into a 5-star hotel and asking for something quite unusual, and the person behind the desk completely froze, did not know what to say, did not know how to handle it, and she said that the best thing you could do is send an email through to her boss. But the irony is I was the one who wasn't going to send the email because I just thought I could get the information immediately from her. But what actually happened was I couldn't. She panicked. It wasn't in the so-called manual, and she had to call her supervisor. So people are not being trained to solve problems, which I think is quite a concern. So my argument in this one here is that you should be spending 1/3 of your budget on job-centered training or learning and development, 1/3 of your budget on person-centered learning and development, and a third on problem-centered learning. And by doing that, you're broadening out the concept of training to include and incorporate learning and development. Okay. Now, number 8 is a management myth is here that employees can't be trusted with sensitive information. Now, this is why senior managers don't disclose information to employees, because they believe that they'll either go running to the local newspaper, or they may go running to the union. Wherever they run to, the implication is the implication is that they themselves, you know, they're going to go blabbing. So that's a bit disturbing, isn't it? In other words, management could be trusted, but not employees. So that in itself sends a terrible message. Of course, some employees can't be trusted, and some managers can't be trusted either. But the whole notion of not telling people anything because they're worried about leaks to the organisation is actually counterproductive. So this creates a paradox, and I call this the initiative paradox. And this is where, if you look up on the left-hand side there, the leader wants initiative from employees, okay? I haven't yet to meet a leader that tells me that they don't want initiative. Now, whether or not they mean it or not is another thing, but they all say they want employees to show initiative. And equally, employees want to display initiative. So this is so everybody's on the same page initially. Leaders want employees to be enterprising, and employees want to be enterprising. And then what happens is that the leader, this is the second circle, what happens then is the leader invites initiative, and the employees aren't sure that management's serious about it and decide to do nothing. So the manager says in a team meeting, I'd like you to show more initiative. The employee is sitting there thinking to himself, I'm not sure that the boss really means that. I know he's just got a new executive coach, and maybe they're talking about those sort of things. I frankly don't think that he's serious, and I will wait this out until such time as he proves to me that he should be should be allowing me to get on with it. So they do nothing. And then the third circle at the bottom is the leader looks at the employee and is disgusted. They're disgusted because the employee hasn't done a thing. And so the leader fills the void and takes in control, and employees feel their skepticism is justified or validated. All right, so this is what happens in organisations all over the world, this paradox. So if we provide people with quality information early enough, they can in fact make decisions, and that's a good thing, okay? So again, it's based on open information, not closed information. Okay, moving right along. Now, I want to share with you, I'll just put all these out first so you can see them. You can see here what I call the corporate culture change cycle, which is our way of benchmarking these things. So let me run through it very briefly with you and show you an organisation's results. Obviously, I've taken the name off and let you have a look. Okay. The first thing that we do is we define the workplace sample, and I think that the sample should be everybody. So everybody's going to indulge in an online survey. So step 2 is we administer the survey online. It takes approximately 20 minutes to complete. And the survey is structured around the framework that I showed you earlier on between the 8 new values of the employer of choice. We analyse the data once we get the survey results back. We create a project team, and the project team would be a replica of the organisation. So we try and keep it as representative as possible, and make sure also that there are more workforce in there than managers, which is basically a replication of what the organisation is. We develop that team, step 5, and we develop some strategies around how we will interpret the information that we've got coming out of the survey results. So why are people telling us what they're telling us? What are they telling us? And what can we do about it are the 3 key questions. We implement the strategies, obviously, and then every 12 months we survey the workplace again to determine how closely aligned are we to, these 8 values. And, that's the big question. So this is the methodology of those 8 steps. So what I might do now is just show you some data. Here's an organisation that completed the corporate culture change cycle not too far ago, not too long ago. And you might say, well, what are you showing me? You'll notice there that the 8 values are embedded in there. There are 8 diagrams. 1 represents each value. And what the circles represent is the vertical strata of the organisation. So red represents, the CEO and his or her direct reports. The yellow represents the middle management. Middle management in this case is anybody that has a managerial job or role. And the blue represents the team, which is the largest group. This is anybody that doesn't have a supervisory role. So one of the unique things about this methodology is that we're looking at the vertical integration rather than the horizontal integration. Now, the more closely aligned the circles, the more effective, the more likely that value is in that organisation. And you can see here that in human spirit and work, we have 1 white circle with lots of pluses in it. So that clearly is one of the big, it's recognised as a value that is well and truly entrenched. Just to add some context, this is a not-for-profit, and this organisation was dealing with homeless youth. And obviously it had a very worthy purpose and cause, and basically people are saying, well, we really enjoy our work here, which is a fantastic result. If I just look at some of the areas that could improve on, just to make a point of it, I would probably say that some of these areas could be improved. The more submerged the blue is with the others, the more likely they are on the same page as the rest of the organisation. It's not always the case. So that's one of the overviews. We use a histogram, which is essentially the same data, and the red line that you can see, red lines you can see there, are basically the employee and the employee's collective response. So if you look at customer focus, for example, you have quite a few people who have disagreed. So that's quite a negative response from the top management around the survey data for customer focus. So that's another way of depicting the results. What gets discussed in the workshops is, or are these questions. These are the questions that show why the results are the way they are. For example, Q42, the one over here on the left-hand side, I have recognised staff for great customer service, which we would argue is one of the key dimensions for creating a customer-focused organisation. Top management you can see here there were 4 in the team. 2 of them agreed, 1 sat on the fence, they neither agreed nor disagreed, and 1 disagreed. So a reasonably good result there. Middle management, there were quite a few of those, 55. 41 agreed, so that's very positive. And so, but what do the workforce say? Now, this is where it gets interesting. The workforce say only 35% agree, 39 disagree, and 27 disagree. So it's not quite as positive, is it, at that level? And that opens itself up for a whole lot of discussions as to why that is the way it is with the project team. You'll notice that these here represent the departments. So these data can be broken down into departments, gives you an idea of how they scored, which is a good comparative analysis. That's a horizontal analysis, not a vertical one. All right, so moving on. So in summary, just before we finish up, and if you've got any questions, type them in because we've got a few minutes left. You need to have a flexibly deployed workforce. You need to have a balance between customer focus and QA. You need to replace your job descriptions with role descriptions, which essentially include non-job roles. You need to organise your work around projects, not functions. And I've shared with you a couple of different structures to do that. You need to build intrinsic motivation to supplement extrinsic motivation. In other words, try to develop the work itself to be attractive rather than all the trinkets and incentives around the work. Number 6, cultivate commitment rather than being loyal. So we want committed people, not necessarily loyal. Look, if you can get both, that's wonderful, but I don't see it very often. And in fact, they're both different concepts, as you can probably be aware. I've explained that earlier on. Broaden learning and development to cover personal and problem-based learning and not just training. And open, not closed communication channels becomes critical. So they're the key messages out of the presentation today. I've got a question here I'm going to respond to. Okay. So, which information for open sharing is most meaningful and useful in an open environment? Financial, strategic, market, or internal risks? I would suggest to you all of those things. I would suggest to you that the objective of the exercise is to help that particular, or help the employees have the same line of sight, the same vision, the same perspective as the management team. And by doing that, they will start to think like managers, which is precisely what you want. So I would argue that all those things are important. And you know, it's just important to take time out of your meetings to describe and explain these things to people. Okay, so thanks for the question. That's pretty much the answer that I'd give you. I would suggest, if you've got any other questions, just a quick couple of plugs. I've got a Lunch and Learn series coming up in May, and it's been very popular and really well patronised. It's a very cost-effective exercise. We've got 6 one-hour webinars that are run over lunch on core leadership skills, and you can just plug into those and you get a recording at the end plus a set of slides. If you're interested in enrolling anybody, including yourself, in your organisation, would you please drop me a line at my email address there and let me know? And what happens is I just send you out an invoice, and once you're in the program, you're in the program. But it's proving to be very popular right across, and we've got people from all over the world in our webinar series now, which is wonderful. And final slide is that if you'd like a copy of my book, that's Attracting and Retaining Talent, Becoming an Employer of Choice, if you send me an email, I'll give you a code. You can go into my website, insert that code and get a 20% discount. Recommended retail price is $35. You'll get it for $28 plus postage. Okay, so just a quick plug at the end. So do we have any more questions, guys, before we wrap up? Doesn't look like it. So anyway, if you do have questions, you are more than welcome to email those to me or any feedback you have as well. So thank you, folks. I once again have enjoyed working with you, and I wish you all the very best in your quest to become employers of choice. It's not a simple process, but it's a very rewarding process, and I guess you've got some idea of what I mean, at least, by an employer of choice. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I wish you all the very best for the rest of the day. Thank you.